I'm not giving the talk with a mask on. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me just make that clear. Oh God. No. We're not meant to live like this. Do you need better lighting?
I got it.
بسم الله جزاك الله خير. All right. Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. You guys don't need to type. You can just say wa alaikum assalam. I know you got used to it, but alhamdulillah. Jazakumullah khairan, brothers and sisters, for joining. This is our sixth session of tafsirah. We cover Surah Yussuf, inshallah ta'ala. It's been an incredible 2 months, subhanallah, since we had our very last tafsirah session. It was sometime in April 10th, subhanallah. So that was about 2 months ago, and it has been, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, sisters. It has been an incredible 2 months with the pandemic, with Ramadan, with social distancing and everything. But I also remember that I was telling the brothers earlier that when we started Surah Yussuf, it was the 5th of March, which means that, and this was literally the very last in-person meeting that we had at Tarbiya, because we basically canceled all the programs right after. And so we had the very first session of Surah Yussuf, and then the pandemic started, and we basically moved everything online. And here we are back, alhamdulillah, to our physical location. I am at the Foothills property. For those of you who don't know where I am right now, I'm not at home, alhamdulillah. I'm at Foothills, and I'm sitting here with 3 privileged brothers who have been basically forced to be in the audience wearing their masks. We have not opened the facility yet for the wider community. This is sort of a test run, a pilot run, if you will, to see how things work with having a meeting in our masjid, basically. But again, what I'm noticing is that Surah Yussuf stayed with us throughout the pandemic, giving us guidance. You know, we keep delving in the surah, subhanallah, except for the month of Ramadan, almost every Friday night thereafter. So Surah Yussuf stayed with us and will stay with us, inshallah, for 1 more week, giving us guidance, giving us insights, giving us a sense of perspective in these very difficult times, helping us cope, basically. And so, alhamdulillah, I'm grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we are back with tafsirah, and jazakumullah khairan for tuning in and for joining us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you. And let me just do one thing here really quick. And if you guys would like to go ahead and share the feed or invite other people to join, please do so. And Bismillah. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair. Brother Abdulillah. Right. There we go. Okay. Bismillah. Let's formally start, inshallah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I begin in the name of Allah. I invoke His peace and blessings upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I ask Allah to extend His blessings to the Prophet's family, his companions, to the followers of the companions, and the men and women that walk in the footsteps. And I ask Allah to include us with them. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Again, Jazakumullah khairan for joining us. This is the 6th session of Surah Yusuf. It's our very first session of Surah Yusuf after the month of Ramadan. We have one more session. This is the only surah that took me 7 full sessions to cover. And quite honestly, it would have taken 10, but I had to really keep it a little bit shorter than I would have otherwise. And so I was telling the brothers earlier that Surah Yusuf, we started right before the pandemic with Surah Yusuf, and here we are back, alhamdulillah, at our masjid, for a pilot run tonight to see how things work if we held tafsirah in our physical location here. So Surah Yusuf has been with us, providing us guidance, providing us with insights, much needed coping mechanisms in these difficult times. And that is essentially the theme of the surah. It's a surah, as we said before, that is about trusting the tadbir of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about trusting the management of Allah in our lives, the micro interventions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does in our lives. And this is a story about the ebbs and flows of history. It's a story about the ups and downs. It's a story about the human being. And the effort that is expected of the human being in order to make changes in the world, but it is also about accepting that ultimately the decision is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and despite our best effort, Allah eventually does what He wills, and His will comes to pass. So it's a story that emphasizes the need for that human effort, but also the necessity to surrender to God's plan. And as we said before, Yusuf, the story of Yusuf, or Surah Yusuf, was revealed about 3 years before Hijrah, towards the tail end of the economic boycott. Despite the Prophet Muhammad's best efforts in order to basically get the Muslims out of this bind, out of this big open prison in which they were all stuck, relief came from the most unexpected paths. Hisham ibn Amr from Banu Amr ibn Lu'ay was a small minor tribe in Mecca. He was not Muslim himself, but he was an activist who basically led other Meccan leaders to void the treaty that brought the boycott to being. The Prophet ﷺ was putting his effort in one direction, but the relief of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came from a very, very different direction. And such is the tadbir of Allah. Again, the micromanagement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of our lives. He still expects us to put the effort, but He wants you to understand that relief may come from a very, very different path. So the story of Yusuf, the human, and less Yusuf the prophet, is an example of surrender to that tadbir. And so we see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala subjects Yusuf every step of the way into really incredible trials, and Yusuf basically endures. So at the very beginning, Yusuf alayhi salam is this little kid that is basically loved by his father. His father is a prophet, loved by his mother, Rahil in Arabic tradition, but in the biblical tradition, obviously, Rachel, who was the favored wife of Yaqub alayhi salam. She was the mother of both Yusuf and, yes, Benjamin, the youngest brother of them all. So all the brothers came from different mothers, but Yusuf and Benjamin came from one mother, and that is Rachel. She was the favored wife of Yaqub alayhi salam. So the early stage of his life, he's cared for by both of his parents. He's sort of like a little bit pampered. He has this dream that was about to propel him on the path of prophethood. Right? So he was like, on the clouds, right up there. And then what happens? He gets betrayed by his brothers. They take him into this abandoned well in the middle of the desert, and they just throw him in there in absolute disbelief, in absolute despair. He doesn't know what to do. He cannot believe that his very brothers that are supposed to be his guardians, protect him, are the ones that basically betrayed him, right? So in the midst of that despair, Jibreel alayhi salam came to him, as we said before, and inspired to him prophethood, gave him wahi, basically. So now his spirits are elevated again, and he's thinking, oh man, I'm becoming a prophet at this young age, maybe a relief is coming soon. But then what happens? This caravan comes and captures him and sells him as a slave. So he's down here again, so from here to down there to up here to down there, and his life continues, right? Oh my God, I'm a slave. I'm being sold in this, slave market in Egypt. And then what happens? He's picked up not by an ordinary person, but rather a nobleman of Egypt who is very kind, who did not have children of his own. So he wanted to actually adopt Yusuf almost as his own son. He's still a slave, but he wanted to treat him with the same love as his own son. He puts him on a pedestal. He makes him, a trustworthy partner in the household. He takes care of his engineering projects and all of these things. And so finally things are looking up again for Yusuf alayhi salam, and life is improving. And then what happens? The cycle continues, right? He gets seduced by the wife of the nobleman, Zulaykha. And she probably had, as I said before, she probably had genuine affections for Yusuf alayhi salam. And I actually venture to say that Yusuf probably had genuine affections for her as well, as many scholars have said that at the very end, Yusuf eventually married her. But we're not going to talk about that yet. And so, despite the affections, that's still his master's wife. He cannot be with her. He cannot touch her. So he initially refuses her advances, but she seduced him, and he was about to fall for that sin. Right? Again, from up there to down here. So he sees the sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he refrains the very last time. Her husband comes in, and he asks questions, and they realize that it was her fault, not his. She's the one that initiated the whole thing, and not him, right? So he's exonerated. He has his honor back. He has his dignity back. He is basically being relieved from all these accusations. So now things are down and up and down and up, right? So he's there now, but then what happens, right? The scandal, the news of that scandal is just now spreading all over Egypt, all over the Egyptian high society. People are talking about it. Oh my God, Imra'atul Azizi turawidu fataha an nafsi. The noble woman is seducing her own slave. What is wrong with her? So as the news of the scandal is spreading everywhere, the powers that be, the people of the status quo, they decide to sweep it all under the rug, bury the whole thing in the sand, and do what to Yusuf? Throw him in jail, right? Let's throw Yusuf in jail, right? So from here, down there again, Yusuf alayhi salam. But in jail, he adapts, and he tries to, basically make friends and make relationships. Remember, he's a prophet at this point. So he has to carry out his responsibility as a prophet no matter what. So he goes in jail. He becomes, the stuff of legends. He starts making relationships with all kinds of people. He starts getting loved and respected by others, and so on and so forth. And he rises in status. He rises in connection. People used to, some scholars say that people used to commit petty crimes in order to be arrested and to be brought to jail so that they can spend some time with Yusuf alayhi salam and receive his teachings directly, right? So even in jail, he managed somehow to swing his own fortunes, a little bit to the better. But then, as this happens, he sees or encounters two men who were, from the court of the king himself, right? And remember, I said this before, that the Quran, when the Quran talks about the pharaohs, the Quran uses which word? What is the word that we use in the Quran to speak of the pharaohs? Their title, Pharaoh. If the king of Egypt is a pharaoh, meaning like a purebred Egyptian, they call him Pharaoh in the Quran, right? But this is the only instance in the Quran when the king of Egypt is called Malik. He's just called king, right? And I said before that it's because in that particular time period there was this dynasty of Semitic people from northern Arabia. They called the Hyksos, and the Hyksos were basically the rulers of Egypt at the time. And so two men from the court of the king of the Hyksos were arrested on conspiracy charges, and Yusuf alayhi salam preached Islam to them in order to help them find some perspective. He knew that one of them was going to be released and the other one was going to be executed. So as a prophet, he did what he could in order to help them find, that sense of perspective, right? And he felt that this is his chance to get out. The butler of the king that will eventually be released will speak a couple of good words about him, right, when he returns. So he's up there again, okay? And then what happens? The man was released, but he forgot to mention anything about Yusuf alayhi salam, and then Yusuf literally languishes in jail for, some scholars say up to 7 years. Okay, so he's back here again, kind of like, his life is becoming difficult again. And then the Pharaoh has this insane dream, right? That all the priests and all the disciples and all the powerful men of Pharaoh's advisors failed to interpret. So Yusuf comes to the rescue. He interprets the dream. His advice to the king was absolutely invaluable. It saves Egypt. It saves the civilized world, as all of us know the story, and I've explained it extensively last time. So Yusuf is up there again. He becomes an advisor to the king. He oversees the execution of the plan himself. He eventually takes the nobleman's job and he becomes the nobleman himself, Azizu Misr. And then he gets married to, many scholars said, to Zulaykha. And life is looking up, and he's exonerated. The truth has been revealed, and everything is good. And Yusuf alayhi salam thinks that is basically the end of his thing, or was it? That is what we are going to basically find out together. So we are at ayah number 58. So we're at ayah number 58, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about this new chapter in the life of Yusuf and the challenges of Yusuf alayhi salam. So he had, I don't want to say forgotten about his family, but he had kind of moved on. He had basically been able to cope with separating from his family, and he's living this life. He's now a politician of Egypt, or maybe not a politician, but at least a man of great importance and great authority in Egypt. Some say that he was basically second to the king himself. But then a massive challenge happened to him, and that is the famine didn't just strike Egypt. It struck all the neighboring countries and communities as well. And the family of Yusuf alayhi salam, Yaqub and his family, they resided in Canaan, which is, somewhere in the southern part of present-day Palestine. Right, so they were struck by the famine as well. So ayah number 58 tells us, وَجَاءَ إِخْوَةُ يُوسُفَ فَدَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ. His brothers, he was like literally one of those days, he's just like doing his thing, and his advisors tell him there is this delegation that is not from Egypt that is here. Mind you, the Egyptians had the habit of giving their leaders titles, right? And so very few people in power had, were called with their first names or last names, right? In fact, the Bible has there's a title that was granted to Yusuf alayhi salam. I don't remember what that title was. And so he was also probably dressed like an Egyptian, right? Like wearing all the stuff that the Egyptians, the pharaohs were wearing at the time. And so one of those days, a delegation comes from Canaan, and he, to his shock and astonishment, that delegation was actually made of his brothers. And that was the first. Some scholars say that it has been 20 years. Some scholars say that it has been 40 years since he saw his brothers last. This is how much time passed, until he came to this point. So his brothers came because they suffer from the famine as well. They brought with them some desert goods that were not in Egypt, but they were in Canaan. right? Stuff that they can use in order to barter, to trade. So they brought with them their own bida'ah, their own goods in order to trade with the king. What is it that they wanted from Egypt, by the way, very particularly? They wanted grain, obviously, because that is the one thing that Yusuf alayhi managed to stockpile over the last 7 years, is lots and lots of grain, right? So they arrive, and the Quran tells us that Yusuf recognized them, فَعَرَفَهُمْ, because it's just his brothers. They're a little bit older now, but he recognized them. But when he left, he was very, very young, so they did not recognize the adult Yusuf, right? وَهُمْ لَهُ مُنْكِرُونَ. They did not recognize him, but he recognized them right away. And he's just kind of brought to the surface all the feelings, all the anger, all the disappointment that he had with his brothers and what they did to him, right? So they came in order to seek that grain and in order to barter with him. So he played along, and he agreed basically to grant them. And then in ayah number 59, وَلَمَّا جَهَّزَهُمْ بِجَهَازِهِمْ قَالَ أَتُونِي بِأَخٍ لَكُمْ مِنْ أَبِيكُمْ. When he has given them, everything that they need, filled their bags and their suitcases with all this stuff, he made a very strange request. He said, can you introduce me to another brother of yours that is not with you here with us tonight? What does that tell you? It tells you two things, right? It tells you that he spent time with his brothers, and they talked and ate and laughed, and he really played along in order to earn their trust. And when he earned their trust, they probably talked about who they are and where they're from. And, this is how many of us, this is how many brothers, this is how many sisters, all our siblings, our father is married to these women and stuff like that. And our youngest brother is not with us, right? You can read between the lines and see what happens there. So they had lengthy conversations. And after those lengthy conversations, our little brother just, our father loves them so much, more than us. And our father decided that he couldn't come with us because he's so overprotective. So the scholars say that Yusuf alayhi salam used that in order to tell them, go tell your father that the nobleman of Egypt himself is requesting to make an audience with little Benjamin. Assuming that, who's going to say no to this powerful man I'm so curious to see your little brother. So, قال أتوني بأخٍ لكم من أبيكم. Ayah number 59. Bring me that little brother of yours. I would like to see him. Don't you see that I'm an honest man? I've given you abundance of grain. إني أوفي الكيل وأنا خير المنزلين. I'm very, very generous. So if you bring me your little brother, I would like to see him. Okay, and so he kind of pushed even further and said, I am so curious to see your brother that if you don't bring me your brother, I will not give you anything. I will not give you any grain. Okay, that was ayah number 60. فَإِن لَمْ تَأْتُونِي بِهِ فَلَا كَيْلَ لَكُمْ عِنْدِي. If you don't bring him, I give you nothing. And ayah number 60, so they're not sure, oh my God, what's going on? We can't ask our father to give us another little brother of ours after what happened last time. There's no way our dad is going to agree to this. But they said, you know what? We're going to give it a shot. قَالُوا سَنُرَاوِدُ عَنْهُ أَبَاهُ. Number 61. We're going to do what we can. We're going to try to use a little, conniving in order to convince our fathers to actually, give him to us. And then Yusuf alayhi salam, in order to make his point clear. Now remember, the bartering had already happened. They gave him the desert goods from Canaan. He gave him grain. That has already happened on the first day. And in order to make his statement, he literally asked his own men to take all the grain out of their bags and to give them their goods back. You're going to go back to Canaan with the same stuff that you brought from there. We have not closed any deals here. We have not closed any transactions. In order to emphasize his points, I am the second in command in Egypt, and whatever I demand, has to happen. So you bring me your little brother. And of course, I'm pretty sure they were so confused as to why he desired to see his little brother so much. So they go back to their father. Ayah number 63. فَلَمَّا رَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَبِيهِمْ. They started lamenting and crying. Father, oh my God, you're not going to believe what happened, right? مُنِعَ مِنَّا الْكَيْلِ. the nobleman of Egypt, he refused to grant us any of the grain, and his condition is that he wants to see all of us siblings, including our little brother Benjamin, right? فَأَرْسِلْ مَعَنَا أَخَانَا نَكْتَلْ. Please, if you want us to bring some grain, you have to let our brother come with us. And that is when Yaqub alayhi salam predictably lashed out. He lashed out, and we see that in ayah number 64. He said to them, قال هل آمنكم عليه إلا كما أمنتكم على أخيه من قبل. Do you want me to entrust you with your little brother as I did before with his own brother Yusuf? Do you want me to do that again? Is that what you're requesting? Right? And something really strange is psychologically is happening here with Yaqub alayhi salam. I mean, you would expect if this happened to Yaqub and he knows that his sons were guilty, and then they come back, God knows what, 20, 30 years later, and make that same request to take little Benjamin, what do you think he's going to say? He's going to give them a categorical no. Okay? But instead of giving them a categorical no, he actually formulates his response in the form of a question. قال هل آمنكم عليه إلا كما أمنتكم على أخيه من قبل. Do you want me to trust you with your little brother as I trusted you with his brother Yusuf before? That's not, I mean, if I said that to my kids, it'd probably be a rhetorical question, right? Like me just making fun of that. Are you serious? But if Yaqub alayhi salam is asking his kids that question, that makes it what? It's not a rhetorical question. He's asking them because he wants to renew that covenant that is between a father and his own sons. He wants to give them a chance to repent. He wants to help them feel that they are not evil people. They are not bent on committing one sin after the other. I did not lose trust and confidence in you forever. What you've done is not entirely unfixable, is what he's telling them. I trusted you last time, you broke the trust. I would like to trust you again. And you bring a compelling case here that of course it still sounds fishy to Yaqub. I mean, what the heck, what the king of Egypt want with my son is still fishy, right? But he's a prophet, and he uses this as a teachable moment in order to help his sons recover from what they've done. Oftentimes when people make major mistakes, they become enslaved by that mistake, and it becomes part of their identity for the rest of their lives. And we make it very difficult for them to snap out of that and to come back to the path, right? Are you? Is that what you're asking me? فَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا. Because I know in my heart that Allah is the best of protectors. Okay? فَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا وَهُوَ أَرْحَمُ الرَّاحِمِينَ. And so they're still having a conversation, and some of them are opening up the bags, and they're like, oh my God, Dad, see, like he sent all the stuff back with us, right? هذه ولما فتحوا متاعهم وجدوا بضاعتهم ردت إليهم. Ayah number 65. When they opened up their bags, they saw that all of their goods that they brought from Canaan in order to barter in Egypt has been given back to them. Okay? So they said to their father, Ya abana ma nabghi. Father, we are not being transgressors. We are nabghi from baghi, dhulm, right? We are not making it up. We are not just concocting this whole thing. We know you don't trust us. But this truly is what happened. And of course, Qurtubi and other scholars, they go out of their way to establish that the sons of Yusuf, actually all of them became prophets later. Like they became so good that they became prophets, which is not very plausible, right? However, we know that they repented, and they know that they have become better people after that incident with Yusuf alayhi salam. So Father, please let us go. We'll take our brother Benjamin. We're going to go get a lot of grain. We're going to be good. We're going to survive. Everything is going to be best. Please let us go with him. So number 66, he doubles down, trying to rebuild that trust with his own sons. And he says to them, لن أرسله معكم حتى تؤتوني موثقا من الله. I'm not going to let him go with you until you give me your covenant in front of Allah, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَتَأْتُنَّنِي بِهِ. That you are going to bring him back. Imagine how hurt a father is that the entire conversation is not about, bringing him back safely. The conversation is about the mere bringing him back. Like, you have a bad history taking my own kids and making them disappear into thin air. All I'm asking is that you promise me you'll bring him back. Subhanallah. What a risk that Yaqub alayhi salam takes with his own sons. In order to do what? In order to help them rebuild their own hearts and rebuild their own self-confidence and rebuild their own connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and truly repent and to realize that they're not bad people, right? They've made a huge mistake and they've suffered so much as a result of that mistake. And there's no worse suffering than the suffering of remorse, by the way. So their father wants them to kind of rebuild that self-confidence by telling them, all I'm asking is that you promise me, give me your word, give me your covenant before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're going to bring my son back to me. And then comes ayah number 67, which is a crucial ayah in applying the theme of Surah Yusuf, again, the invitation of the human being to put their own effort, but ultimately realizing the necessity of surrendering to the tadbir, to the management of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, both at the same time. So ayah number 67 shows us how this theme applies to not Yusuf this time, but applies to Yaqub alayhi salam. وقال يا بني لا تدخلوا من باب واحد ودخلوا من أبواب متفرقة. 67. He instructs his sons to enter the city in Egypt where Yusuf was from multiple gates. Don't enter all of you from the same gate, enter from multiple gates. Okay? Many scholars of tafsir say that the reason he instructed his sons to do that is because he was fearful of what? No, it's something a lot sillier than that. That he was frightened that what would happen to his sons. That he was, many scholars actually of tafsir, like literally many of them, they say that what Yaqub alayhi salam was worried about was hasad. He was worried about envy and jealousy. I mean, all these brothers, healthy, together, right? Entering Egypt or entering the city from the same gate, and then they would put some evil eye on them or something like this. Again, it doesn't sound very insightful, doesn't sound very plausible. It's possible, but it's not very plausible. Okay, what makes more sense to me is that, and I think it's explained further in ayah number 68, is that he was basically telling them, take your precautions. I don't know what this man wants with you guys or with my son. But we don't have a choice but to comply, otherwise we're going to starve to death. So we need to go back and try to seek that grain. But I want you, if there is some kind of plotting, if there's some kind of a plan, I want you to enter from multiple gates so that, if one group gets trapped, maybe the other group will be able to survive. Okay? That was his own human effort. He's putting his own human effort in order to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he's trying. Yet, he teaches his sons and he teaches us that ultimately, in al-hukmu illa lillah. The ultimate and final decree will be in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I am not saying that my methods will protect you from any possible danger. What I'm saying is that we have to do our part. But ultimately the true protector is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَاللَّهُ خَيْرٌ حَافِظًا, as he said earlier. 68 describes this logic further. وَلَمَّا دَخَلُوا مِنْ حَيْثُ أَمَرَهُمْ أَبُوهُم, they complied with what their dad requested. Okay, مَا كَانَ يُغْنِي عَنْهُم مِّنَ اللَّهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. It was not necessarily the one move that was going to protect them from any decree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated. That is not it. That's not what was going to change anything. إِلَّا حَاجَةً فِي نَفْسِ يَعْقُوبَ قَضَاهَا. This was just in Yaqub, in his own soul, just wanting to do his part. But he ultimately knows that it's in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eventually. So we do what we can, but we have to surrender to the will of Allah azza wa jalla. All right. Now, ayat 69 through 79 describe this tremendous drama in detail, right? The brothers arrived, they enter into the court of Yusuf, they have their little brother, they complied with his request. And the next 10 ayat basically tell us what transpired and showed us that Yusuf alayhi salam had a tremendous desire to not only see his brother, but to keep him. He had a tremendous desire to keep his brother. Okay? And I know that Yusuf is a prophet, Yaqub is a prophet. And I know that you are wondering, this sort of like plan that Yusuf came up with, trying to incriminate his own brother, I'll talk about that in detail, in order to justify keeping him, just sounds like, unbecoming of a prophet, especially that you know that your father had already suffered your own loss. Why are you doing something that would cause your father to suffer the loss of his other son as well, knowing all too well that he initially refused to even let Benjamin go to Egypt because he was so worried about him, right? Like there's something in the traditional narrative here about the story. I will still mention the traditional narrative because we have to be honest with what the scholars said. But there's something about it that never really sat well with me. So what is the conventional understanding of these 10 ayat? Conventional understanding is that the brothers arrive, they bring with them Benjamin. Yusuf alayhi salam asked Benjamin to approach his own seat and to sit next to him, and he confided in him and he told him, hey, I am your brother Yusuf. And he asked him to keep that between them. Okay. And then he thanked the brothers. He gave them all the grain that they asked for, and he took the desert goods from Canaan, and the transaction was sealed. Okay, the transaction was completed. Okay. And then when they all went to sleep, what did Yusuf do? I understand that you guys have your face masks with you. You can still talk, You can still talk, right? So he according to the conventional understanding of these ayat, he asked one of his servants or one of his men to take a sa', which is just the Arabic word for like a nice fancy golden cup, okay, that has two handles, and they used to hold for to drink in it or whatever. But it was a very, very expensive item. In fact, some scholars say that it was given to him as a gift from the king himself. And so, according to this narrative, he basically asked one of his servants to put this in which bag? In the bag of his brother Benjamin. And then in the morning, they basically said, oh my God, there's an item that is lost. You guys are just a bunch of thieves, okay? And of course, the brothers said, we are not thieves, and they were honest. We're not here to steal anything. We're here to do an honest business transaction, to take stuff from you guys. We're not here to steal anything. So he said, okay, then we have to search your belongings and we have to frisk you guys, right? So he asked his men to go one after the other, all the brothers, to look through their stuff, and then they found the cup in whose belongings? In Benjamin's, okay? And that's when he used that as an excuse to say, well, you're mine now. Because, if you steal something from someone and you're caught, you basically become their slave. And that was his way of justifying how he could keep his brother Benjamin, because it was against the law in Egypt. It was basically against the law in Egypt. Actually, ayah number 76 tells you that. ما كان ليأخذ أخاه في دين الملك إلا أن يشاء الله. According to the laws of the king, there was no possible way for him to take his brother, because his legal guardians are right there. They have to agree. So according to the laws of Egypt at the moment, there was no way for him to have kept his brother. So he kind of came up with this disingenuous plan in order to basically keep his brother. Do we agree that that is the story that we've always been told? Right? And again, I thought about it time and time again, and I keep asking myself, what is it that Yusuf alayhi salam gained from this? He knows that this was going to put so much further pressure and pain on his father, who's already suffering. If you are planning to eventually forgive your brothers, why are you putting them through further suffering, right? If you're planning to bring your family to Egypt and for them to live with you, and you know, لا تثريب عليكم اليوم, there shall be, you know, no blame upon you, and literally just let it all go. Why does he have to make them suffer? You know, why is he punishing them psychologically, right? It's just the whole thing did not feel to me like this is something that a prophet would do. And I'm not rejecting the conventional understanding of it. I'm just saying maybe we need to look into something else. Find if there's an alternative narrative that may explain this a little bit more effectively for us. So what is happening here? And by the way, of course, when it appeared that Benjamin was the one that stole the item, one of the brothers immediately jumped in and said what? إن يسرق فقد سرق أخ له من قبل. If he's a thief, you know what? He had a brother before that used to be a thief as well. Like, see, like there's still something in their hearts about Yusuf, that they're making up story about Yusuf being a thief, which is not, you know. So of course Yusuf doesn't respond to that. He doesn't say anything. فأسرها يوسف في نفسه. He kept it to himself. It hurt him, but he didn't say anything because there's a bigger plan in his mind. Almost sounds like Yusuf is being like an evil mastermind. And he has like this plan that is unfolding in order to hurt his brothers. It's not what we would expect of him, right? So one of the other brothers said, you know, فَخُذْ أَحَدَنَا مَكَانًا. Please, you know, your majesty or your grace, whatever. His father is not going to tolerate losing his own son. So please take one of us. So he says to them, مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ أَن نَأْخُذَ إِلَّا مَنْ وَجَدْنَا مَتَاعَنَا عِنْدَهُ. You know, I seek refuge in Allah from this inequity. You know, I cannot punish someone except the one in whose luggage we found the lost item. Okay, actually reminds me of an interesting story at the time of Al-Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, you know, the tyrant of Iraq. He sent his police in order to arrest a man. They didn't find the man, so they found his brother, so they arrested the brother. Okay, it doesn't matter, you know, anyone from the family would do. So their mom came to the governor himself, Al-Hajjaj, in order to complain to him. Al-Hajjaj, even though he was an absolute tyrant, like he was a killer, you know, like he'd kill thousands of people without batting an eye, but he had some kind of respect to women. So a woman comes to his court, he felt obligated to meet her. So she came and she said to him, why did you take my other brother? Your men were not there to arrest him. They were there to arrest his other brother, and he traveled. We haven't seen him in years. Okay? So he recited to her this verse of poetry from the days of Jahiliyyah, from the days of before Islam. And then it goes something like this. وَرُبَّ مَأْخُوذٌ بِذَنْبِ عَشِيرَتِهِ وَنَجَى الْمُقَارِفُ صَاحِبُ الذَّنْبِ. Right? It so often happens that a man would be punished by association because of the sins of his family, and the one that committed the sin himself gets away. So she told him, well, I heard Allah says something different in the Quran. So he told her what? She said to him in the Surah of Yusuf alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that Yusuf said, مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ أَن نَأْخُذَ إِلَّا مَنْ وَجَدَنَا مَتَاعَنَا عِنْدَهُ. You know, I would never punish someone except the one, you know, that actually committed the sin. So would you like to do it the Hajjaj way, or would you like to do it the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So Al-Hajjaj smiled and he said to her, you know, أصابت المرأة وأخطأ الحجاج. The woman is right and Hajjaj is wrong, and he immediately ordered his men to release her son. Right, and so this is a very important notion, that Yusuf sincerely says to them, "Ma'adh Allah, oh God, astaghfirullah, I would never punish someone except the one who actually committed the crime." But wait a second, did Benjamin commit any crimes? Like, this whole thing just sounds weird. Like, are you just playing with Allah's name in vain? Like, astaghfirullah, it's like, you know, like he knows what he did. Astaghfirullah, I would never do such thing. Like, doesn't sound, again, the whole thing, the way it's weaved, doesn't sound like this is something that a prophet would do. Okay, so that led me to a bit of an investigation, and then I looked at ayah number 76 in particular. And ayah number 76 has a couple of like little clues there that may put us in a different direction. Okay, so 76 says this: فَبَدَأَ بِأَوْعِيَتِهِمْ قَبْلَ وِعَاءِ أَخِي. When he ordered his men to search, he asked them to search the luggage or the belongings of all the brothers before Binyamin. Okay? ثُمَّ اسْتَخْرَجَهَا مِنْ وِعَاءِ أَخِي. And then he took it out from Benjamin's belongings. كَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف. It is as such that we have done kaid. And kaid can be understood as tadbir from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Allah, this is how we've managed that little situation for Yusuf alayhi salam. His heart really desired to have his little brother, but he knew that this was against the laws, so we inspired him to do with this little trickery, with this little plotting. All right, كَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف. But then this would suggest that the kaid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was used for something that is not appropriate. Okay? Or it could suggest that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that contrived the plan himself without Yusuf being a part of it. Yusuf had a desire to have his brother with him, but he didn't know how to do that because it would have been against the law. Okay? So he just kind of let it go. And he decided, as a way of expressing love to his own brother, he decided to give him what? He decided to give him a gift that the king had granted him, right? The little cup, golden cup, and he just did not know how to give it to his brother in front of everyone else, so he secretly put it in his brother's belongings in order to claim it back the following day and call it theft? No, in order to do what? No, in order for this to be an actual gift to his brother, right? But then in the palace, those items are of extreme importance. And there's guards. And in the morning, so if Yusuf alayhi salam goes and grabs this item by himself and he fails to inform the guards about it, then in the morning the guards would do a little inventory check, and they look on the shelves and see that one item is missing, right? So they would do what? They sound the alarm, right? I want you to look at ayah number 76 and actually pay attention to the language, okay? كَذَلِكَ كِدْنَا لِيُوسُف. We have contrived the plan for Yusuf's sake because he has suffered enough. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to make this his gift to Yusuf in order to comfort him, knowing what Yusuf really wanted, and that is his brother, for his brother to stay with him. ما كان ليأخذ أخاه في دين الملك إلا أن يشاء الله. Because it was not possible for Yusuf to take his brother according to the laws of the king except with Allah's will. There was no other way around. Okay? Now, look at ayah number 70. فَلَمَّا جَهَّزَهُمْ بِجَهَازِهِمْ. See, I'm working the logic backwards now. I'm going back to the beginning of the 10 ayat. فَلَمَّا جَهَّزَهُمْ بِجَهَازِهِمْ. When he had provided them with all their provisions and all the stuff that they needed, جَعَلَ السِّقَايَةَ فِي رَحْلِ أَخِيهِ. It was he who put the cup in his brother's belongings. But then who sounded the alarm? See? ثُمَّ أَذَّنَ مُؤَذِّنٌ. It was somebody else that sounded the alarm. Yusuf alayhi salam is the one that gave his brother the gift, but it was somebody else that sounded the alarm. So this actually works a little bit better for me. It feels a little bit more plausible that here's the alternative narrative, and that is Yusuf alayhi salam wanted to give his brother a gift. He could not reveal himself yet because he was not ready psychologically to tell his brothers that I'm Yusuf. So he wanted to just give his brother a gift, but he knew that he could not give him his gifts when he was with his other brothers all the time. So he had to find a way to hide that gift in his brother's belongings. But when the guards realized that the item was missing, they sounded the alarm and they said, "Guys, you're thieves! And then Yusuf alayhi salam was kind of stuck. That was Allah's plan for him. Allah contrived, kaid, right? So in the morning, Yusuf was like stuck. Okay, I don't know what to do now. If I said I am the one that put it in my brother's belongings, then I am basically revealing my own affections for my brother, which could be misunderstood in 1,000 different ways. So I don't want to do that. And if I stay silent, then my brother will be accused of theft. But wait a second. If my brother is accused of theft, what's going to happen? He stays with me. Oh my God, that's really what I wanted. Maybe this is Allah's gift for me. Okay? That is just another way of looking at it that would exonerate Yusuf alayhi salam from doing something that we would find to be a little bit implausible or a little bit edgy, that is just uncharacteristic of him and his honesty and his truthfulness and his compassion, right? So Benjamin is now with him, and the brothers are in absolute utter shock because they lost their little brother for the second time, and they didn't know what to do. And ayah number 80 tells you about a conversation that happened privately between them. Okay. فَلَمَّا اسْتَيْأَسُوا مِنْهُ خَلَصُوا نَجِيًّا. When they have despaired of having their brother back, they withdrew to take counsel. They withdrew to be private with each other and basically take counsel. Their oldest, and of course there are different narrations about who the oldest was, Yehuda or Shimon, whatever. The Bible has all of their names, but the Quran does not mention their names. So the oldest one, because the oldest one was also one of those, was heavily involved in what happened to Yusuf, decades earlier. So the oldest one was in such great shock and grief and remorse that he told them, guys, I cannot go back home and meet our father and look him in the eyes and tell him we lost Benjamin. I can't. That's not going to happen. Okay? I'm staying here, and I'm not going to go anywhere until my father, gives me his word and tells me that it's okay for me to return. And I want you to ask all the other men that were with us in the caravan, all the other witnesses, let them tell our father what actually happened, because we did not do this. Our father's not going to believe us, but please ask everybody else to testify. فَلَنْ أَبْرَحَ الْأَرْضَ حَتَّى يَأْذَنَ لِي أَبِي أَوْ يَحْكُمَ اللَّهُ لِي. I'm not leaving until my father gives me permission or I get respite from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ارجعوا إلى أبيكم, in ayah number 81. Go back to your father. You go, I'm staying here. You go. فَقُولُوا يَا أَبَانَ إِنَّ ابْنَكَ سَرَقَ. Father, we don't know what happened. Your son, committed theft. وَمَا شَهِدْنَا إِلَّا بِمَا عَلِمْنَا. And Allah is our witness. We're testifying truthfully for what we've seen. وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةَ الَّتِي كُنَّا فِيهَا. Go ahead and ask around if you'd like to verify on your own. وَالْعِيرَ الَّتِي أَقْبَلْنَا فِيهَا. And the other men in the same caravan. وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. Father, this time we truly are truthful. Which, when you speak to your father like this, that this time, I swear to God, I'm really saying the truth. What does that tell your dad? That last time you were lying. Right? That last time you were lying. How is it that Yaqub alayhi salam received all of this, and how did he process the loss of his second son, again, at the hands of his brothers again, and the amount of grief that he was in? He's a prophet, but he's also a human being, just like us. Sometimes he doesn't know the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In good conscience, in good faith, he entrusted his sons, again, after 20, 30 years, he entrusted them and he took a chance with them and he failed them again. I mean, how are you supposed to feel? What are you supposed to think of Allah? Lord, I'm your prophet. And you allowed this to happen to my son Yusuf at the hands of his brothers. And then you allow this to happen again to Benjamin at the hands of his brothers. Like, imagine the amount of disillusionment and the amount of confusion that a man would have towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when the same assault happens twice. I mean, he hasn't even recovered from the loss of Yusuf alayhi salam yet. And then Allah does this again to him. SubhanAllah. How is it? How did he handle all of this and how he processed all of this? Inshallah, we'll talk about that next time alongside with the rest of the story, and we will conclude it together. A lot of great lessons to learn from that. So inshallah, we will do this next Friday. Next Friday, with the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He gave us a chance to live and continue to be under the shade of the Quran. Jazakumullahu khairan for tuning in, for joining us, you guys. May Allah bless all of you. And I can take some questions, inshallah. If you have any questions online, please do submit your questions by typing them. And the 4 or 5 brothers here that are stuck with me in this room, I hope that I wasn't wearing my mask and got a little carried away. I hope I wasn't spitting all over the place. Please forgive me if I did.
You're like 8 feet away from everybody.
Okay, alhamdulillah. So I can take some questions, you guys, if you have any.
If any questions come to mind, I can read them.
Very good. Yes.
I have a question. The story of Yusuf is always very interesting with the up and down, upheaval, and interpretation of the wisdom of God behind it. But I believe there's another dimension to it, the relationship between the father and the son. And some of the relationship between them and what the son do to the parents, how the parents should treat his son, how to trust him over time, and then the story obviously brings different situations. In this case, it's more importantly is how they treated the younger brother, which is basically his beloved brother. What are the teachings from that in terms of how the parents have to deal with the situation and what the kids give them over time, even at his old age when they should be taking care of him, they could create a problem for him, and he still advises them and gives them guidance on how to do it, how to lead that life, to make them righteous in a way.
Jazakallah khair. The question is, there is so much in the story of Yusuf alayhi salam that may give us insights and guidance about the parent-child relationship, and so we see what the sons of Yaqub did and how they hurt their father so much. But also one of their complaints was that their father favored their brother Yusuf, and so the father has perceptions of his children, and the kids have perceptions of their father. And so the question is, what are the lessons that we can learn from all of this? I think the first lesson is that before we have kids, we really need to think long and hard. Okay, I take that back. Having children is a blessing, obviously. But you have to be prepared, I think, for the fact that being a parent never ceases to be the case for the rest of your life. A lot of people think that parenting, okay, especially in America, right? I'm a parent until my kid reaches the age of 18 and just kick him out of the house. That's it. I'm no longer a parent. Now I have my life back. I'm free. Like, why? Then what's the point of bringing organic material to the world and then disavowing it after 18 years? Like, for me, that's just so arbitrary and makes absolutely no sense. I think this story teaches us that, for starters, that parenting is a lifetime adventure, for the lack of a better word, and that is every stage of our children's development brings its own challenges. So when they're very young, your biggest challenge is, potty training. And then, a few years later, your biggest challenge is, teach them how to pray. And then they become teenager. Your biggest challenge is to keep them on the deen and make sure that they're not doing drugs or whatever, right? And then college, making sure that they choose a good career. And then it becomes a matter of, finding a spouse and making sure that you don't have a divorce and land back on your lap, after all these years, you're gone and then you're back. What is wrong with this picture? Every single stage brings its own challenges. And if you would like to become a parent, you have to be prepared for that it is not going to stop at any point. You're always going to be a parent. Yaqub alayhi salam, parents, he's probably like 90 or 100 at this point, and he's still parenting his like 75-year-old sons, right? After all these years. It's just absolutely remarkable. It also teaches us that no matter how grave the assault is, the sin, the mistake, no one is beyond reproach and no one is beyond repair. Okay? We have to have the courage to talk to each other, to converse with each other, and you see the sons being comfortable telling their father a lot of stuff that I can't even say to my father. Like in the conversation, you're still thinking about Yusuf after all these years. Like, what is wrong with you? Okay, almost suggesting that their father treated them unfairly. We don't know if that is the case. I don't think that Yaqub would treat his own sons unfairly, but there is a rapport in the relationship, is what I'm saying, and that rapport allowed them to still be in the house and for their father to still, have a relationship with them. And to still have hope that his sons will eventually change and become better human beings. He never gave up on them, is the point. He never gave up on Yusuf after losing him, right? Asallahu, later on, we have not covered that ayah yet, but he basically said, after losing Benjamin, he says, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will unite me with them both. He still thinks that there is hope that he might have Yusuf back. Okay, and so no one is beyond reproach, no one is beyond repair. As a parent, we just do what we can every step of the way, every stage of our sons and daughters' development, and we do what we can until death do us part, basically.
Question from online.
Yes.
It says that Yusuf alayhi salam had such a lofty status in Egyptian society. At the time, how did Bani Israel eventually end up being enslaved at the time of Musa alayhi salam? Something to do with dynastic change in Egypt, where pharaohs were considered a god?
Right. So the question is, if Yusuf alayhi salam had such a status in Egyptian society, how come the Hebrews were enslaved later? I mean, we've addressed that before. If you've been tuning in any of the last few sessions, but let me talk about it again. Number one, Yusuf alayhi salam was a Semite, and the Hyksos dynasty that ruled Egypt at the time was also a dynasty of Semitic people. So there was some type of solidarity between them. And of course, this was an outsider dynasty that came into Egypt, and occupied the country basically and ruled the country. And Egyptians historically are used to that. Okay. I think we're still occupied to this day, when you think about it. And so the Hyksos were Semitic people, and so they were kind of like, tolerant with the Hebrews, who were, there was another group of Semitic people. And also because the Hyksos were in power, it sort of paved the way for the legend of Yusuf to be built and for Egyptian society to talk about him. He was a prophet, he was well respected, he had a lot of followers. But then a couple of generations later, and so the Hebrews came, when Yaqub alayhi salam and the rest of the tribes of Israel came into Egypt, and they resided there. They left Canaan and they came into Egypt, right? And of course, those of you who are confused about the chronological order, this is all before Musa alayhi salam, right? Musa came very, very late after that. And then the Egyptians sort of like restored power. They kicked out the Hyksos and they took control over the country again. So the Semitic people that at some point were very favored and sort of like in the upper class, what happened to them? Now they're looked down upon. They were like in cahoots with the Hyksos. They were like spies. They were like, a fifth column, whatever it is. So mistreatment of the Hebrews became quite rampant. And gradually over the next couple of generations, they were all enslaved. And all of the teachings of Yusuf alayhi salam were not only lost, I mean, they became super illegal. And Egyptians had a habit of destroying the history of previous dynasties. So when pharaohs came in and took over, I'm pretty sure like temples in Egypt, like there could have been like all kinds of monotheistic temples at the time of Yusuf alayhi salam that probably the pharaohs completely wiped out. and they brought polytheism again. And that's why we don't see that history when we visit Egypt. It just doesn't exist because it was completely wiped out and destroyed. And the Hebrews were reduced from, protected status into slaves. So
Another question from online.
let me take another question from offline first.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
So, as a parent, what do you do if you feel that your heart is loving one child more than others? Like, I've read it, but I'm not sure if that's true. Is that this is a normal feeling, but you should not show it?
That's a good question. I think a lot of parents could use a little help with that one. The question is, what do we do if the heart, as a parent, if the heart feels that you love one of your children more than the other, right? See, I understand. The reason we ask this question is that in Western culture, we are taught that we are supposed to love our kids unconditionally. We're taught to love them the same. In almost every other culture in the world, that is not the case. Love is earned. It's earned through your good character, your respect, your empathy, your compassion. I don't need to love you, even if you're my child, just because you are a continuation of my genetic code. You understand what I'm saying? Love is something that has to be earned. I understand that we are naturally inclined to love our children, okay? But our children may commit enough horrific assaults that love erodes over time. I don't know how much love Yaqub alayhi salam had for his sons. I mean, the surah doesn't tell us. But the surah, and that goes back to your question, the surah says that he tried his hardest to be a good parent until the very end. In fact, there's no reference in the surah whatsoever to the amount of love that he had to the other sons. Is it possible that he resented them? Very, very possible. Quite honestly, well deserved, if that's the case. But did he fall short in treating them with the kindness that they expected? No. It is possible that your heart feels that you love this child more than that child, but you should actively, every single day, do what you can to make sure that does not show on your actions and that you still treat them fairly and equally, no matter what. Right? So.
Okay, a question from online, and I'm going to maybe add to the question. So it says, it was mentioned that in this scenario, the good scholar traditionally described it. It may in some way insult our view of Prophet Yusuf salam because it involves trickery. And is this not similar to the situation of Ibrahim salam when he said that his wife is actually his sister in order to protect them, but also kind of using trickery? And I think I'll add to the question that is there like can you maybe give us like a basic conversation on when it is acceptable Islamically to say something untrue or to even engage in falsehood trickery?
Jazakallah khair. So the question is basically making a comparison between Yusuf's possible trick move by contriving this whole plot with Ibrahim alayhi salam lying to the king of Egypt about Sarah being his sister and not his wife, because if he says she's my wife and the king covets her, he might actually execute Ibrahim in order to have his wife. But if he says she's my sister, then maybe the king would use more civilized ways to pursue her. Oh, can I marry her? Whatever. The difference, I think, between the two situations is that the desire of Yusuf alayhi salam to just have his brother be in his company involves a certain degree of vanity. He just wants to be with his brother because that brings him satisfaction. Okay? As opposed to Ibrahim alayhi salam, who is literally dodging the bullet of death. And so this is one of those situations. I mean, the other part of the question is that you're asking me, what are the situations under which lying becomes halal? And I would say when there's a gun to your head. All right? in order to protect your own life. And that has to be what it is. Your life is on the line. You're not trying to protect your interests. You're not trying to protect your finances. You're protecting your life. Like literally, if I say the truth, I will get killed. It is in that situation that, it becomes permissible to not say the truth. Those are very, very rare instances. There's a couple of other instances, for example, if you're trying to reconcile between people, right? So, Yusuf and Munzir are upset with each other. So I go to Munzir and tell him, oh man, Yusuf was just raving about you this morning and he was saying how cool of a guy you are. And then I go to Yusuf and say the same thing in order to bring people together. That is, one of those instances. The other instance, some of the scholars jokingly mention is when you praise your wife's food. Hopefully it's not a lie, but you and I know that sometimes it's not true. Right? What's that?
I have to learn that.
You have to learn it the hard way, huh? The other one is also lying to the enemy. If you are engaged in warfare and you're captured by the enemy, and the enemy is asking about all your defenses, astaghfirullah, I can't really tell a lie. So, we have soldiers over here, and we have battalions over there. You cannot do that, right? So there's a couple of those exceptions that make perfect sense, that in Sharia, we are permitted to not say the truth. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, it's 8:44. Our plan was to finish at 8:45. How's that? Huh? Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. Jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and reward you, increase you in knowledge, increase you in the love of the Quran. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep us under the shade of His great book for as long as we live. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the people of the Quran and to enter Jannah among them. Ameen, ameen, ameen. Jazakallah khair for joining us, you guys. And inshallah ta'ala, next Friday night, we will finalize the very last chapter of Surah Yusuf. Looking forward to seeing you then, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.